trees this morning.
Late versions too.
There's about 27 versions.
Yeah.
I've got the August 20th draft, I presume that's
That's
a legit one.
That's the latest one, John.
So I know Elliot's goal here was to really talk at a high level about kind of where all Senate Bill 1 and where do we end up in terms of revenue and all that. So it's gonna be a little hard to read on the screen, but maybe we'll start at the high level, and then I think honestly, when Elliot gets in here he comes, we can get going. All right, Mike, you want to walk us through this?
Sure. So I'm going to focus a little bit, kind of just big picture legislation, what happened, and then talk about the revenues, and then any questions about the budget, I'll defer really to the mayor and Elliot and Lisa on how the budget's being structured this year. It is significantly different than last year. So, and for the most part, what I'm going to report today is positive. So that's encouraging. But for me, this last legislative session was very stressful in that we had a couple things going on. We obviously had legislation that we were trying to work through for the city of Fishers, but just in general, how this session progressed. Early in the session, at the end of January, I was on the phone with the director of the county association, and his name's David Bodorf, and I said, boy, David, I said, I don't know how you feel. I said, but this feels like a train coming through, and there's no slowing it down, and it's going forward. And his response back to me was, well, it feels like the last week of the session down here, and it's the end of January. And so it was just very active. And I think to be real frank, there was infighting going on about what it should look like. And really at a high level, when the first version of Senate Bill 1 came out, it really was the governor's proposal. In his campaign, he had promised to reduce property taxes. And so that first version was pretty devastating to all units. It wasn't necessarily municipalities or the counties or schools, although schools, I would say, took a little bigger hit this year than maybe some of the other units. I could touch on that later. So the first version comes out, it's the governor's version. The second version of Senate Bill 1 comes out is the senator's version. And I know for a fact, because we had spoken to some of these senators, that they were negotiating with the governor's office to lessen that impact of the losses of that property tax. And neither one of those two proposals included, hi Tiffany, I haven't seen you in a while. Neither one of those proposals included any replacement revenue. And so that was kind of big. And so then it flipped over to the House, and Representative Thompson, Chair, House Ways and Means, had been working on a property tax reform bill that was pretty complex and detailed. And there was conversation that it was so complex that it wouldn't pass. Ultimately, that's what took the life of Senate Bill 1. That became Senate Bill 1 for the most part, with one exception. The governor all along was not happy with the Senate version, the senator's version, nor was he completely happy with Representative Thompson's bill, and had been threatening special sessions all along in the IBJ. I'm not making that up. He was saying things like that in the IBJ. But how they then got it over the finish line was with the new property tax credit, not a circuit breaker, much different than a circuit breaker. This is a credit of up to 10% or $300 maximum, and it's applied after the tax bill's computed. So we've been living in the world of circuit breakers for a while. 1% for homeowners, 2% for residential rental property, 2% for farmers, then 3% commercial. We've been living under those conditions for a while. But this is different. You make that calculation and you hit the 1% circuit breaker, but then it's reduced further by this credit. And to use a simple math, to use simple math, use a $300,000 house. A $300,000 house has a maximum tax liability under the 1% of $3,000. Now that home will get a 10% credit or a maximum of $300,000. Now their tax liability is $2,700. That new credit is a loss. That did not come. You have the ability to make it up, and I'll talk about that later about local option income tax, but that is a pure loss, and that does take effect in 2026. And so there's a new line in the fiscal plan that I built in to identify that going forward. But that is really it was really Thompson's bill with this new credit. Bam, it didn't even go to committee. It went through so quick that both houses, the House and the Senate signed off. The governor signed it before the session was even over. And that's the train I was describing, is that it just went so fast, so quick. But there was a lot of conversations behind the scenes, even some infighting going on about what that should look like.
And what's the total fiscal, the $300 credit for everything?
For the city of Fishers?
No, for the state.
Oh, for the state, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it's
In the billion.
yeah, it's a significant number.
And what's the surplus?
So the surplus, this will affect each individual local. It doesn't affect the state budget. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm trying to get my head around what's the state surplus at the moment?
3 billion?
Yeah.
Pretty
I
big.
think their revenues are doing a little bit, I heard their revenues are doing a little bit better than what they had planned on. So that's encouraging.
My point is, he could have taken some out of the surplus to fund his $300 gift
Oh,
to
I got you.
taxpayers
I get
without making people lay off police and firefighters.
Yeah. So I will also say that it's a complex piece of legislation and that all my clients are affected differently. Every plan is unique. The conditions are different. So let me talk about some of the components of the bill and why it's going to have such an impact and affects people differently. First, one of the things was trying to control the property tax on homes. That's who they have taken big hits in the last 2 years. And so what they have done is we've always had a supplemental homestead deduction. And in 2025, that supplemental homestead deduction is 37.5%. That is going to increase between 2026 to 2031 to 66.7%. So that $300,000 home that I was talking about will be paying on $100,000 assessed valuation. So they are going to erase a lot of the tax base with that, obviously. And it's going to cause tax rates to go up, which is what they fully expect. But in addition to that, then there's this credit. So you have that in play that's going to play out over time. You have the credit that gets put in right away in 26. Then they also introduced a new deduction for the 2% rental property, or the 2% category, and that being farmers and rental property. That is going to start off at 6% in 2026 and grow to 33% by 2031. Now, it has always puzzled me just a little bit, and we have some of the situation. You could have two identical homes, one being a rental property and one being a home, and the one has a 1% cap and the other has a 2% cap. You know, it's always seemed a bit unfair that same home is paying and it's still being used as a rental. My concern about it is, though, a lot of the rental properties today are owned by big corporations, right? And so does that really bleed through to the renter, or does it bleed through to their bottom line in that they would have a lesser tax liability now? Will they lower their rent to say, hey, my property taxes went down? Probably not. But anyway, so that erases some of the tax base. And that actually, you know, that affects all 2%. So apartments, that will lose some value to that. And then farm ground, farmers actually did pretty well this session too. They actually got their assessments lowered and retroed back to this year, in that they changed what's called the capitalization rate. And that was about a 7% reduction in their per acre price. And now they get this additional 6%. So rural communities, not so much in Fishers, we don't have much farm ground left in the city of Fishers, but in rural communities, they're concerned because their tax base is farmers. And so you got rural schools that are concerned, or these small little units out there that will be impacted by that. In addition to that, then they got business personal property. In the original bill, Senate Bill 1, it was going to be anything less than $100 million would not have to report anymore. Right now, that threshold's $80,000. It was going to take effect in 2026. They then cleaned that up in a DLGF bill. So they immediately changed it because they realized the mechanics of it wouldn't work because everybody had already filed their returns, the personal property returns. So they eliminated 26, and so it still remains at $80,000. But in 27, it slams in, and that is going to be $2 million or less. So anything $2 million less in personal property no longer gets reported instead of $80,000. So if you get the theme of what's going on here, they're erasing your tax base. Our assessment is going, our assessed value is going to go down over time. Not so much in 26. This is the interesting thing. In 26, there's not a lot of change in that because the supplemental deduction is only going up from 37.5% to 40%. So that wasn't a big hit. The credit, that's a hit. But that's not a big change. So you're going to hear in a moment, we actually saw growth yet in our assessed valuation in 26. But then they revamped local option income tax significantly, and I'm going to touch on that later. But when we start, because we've had a lot of change in that as well. But some of you have heard me say this. John, you probably heard me say this even back when you were on the school board. And this was not my comment. My first boss said this to me years ago in the 80s, because you're going to find in this world that you work in that the only fair tax is the one someone else pays. And that's what we're doing. We're moving it around who's going to have to pay it. And this was not my comment either, but this was in the IBJ, but it was some thoughtful young person that put this together. And his comment was, congratulations, baby boomers. You own all the real estate. You just got your property taxes reduced. And now you're raising my income tax to make up for it. You just made it harder for me to buy a home. And I thought that was a pretty good observation on some young person's part of changing the payer. And so that was just some of the things that were happening.
And maybe, Mike, you're going to touch on this, but one of the complex things for all of us is the narrative at the state level is that there's property tax relief occurring, but there is a scenario in 2026 where people's individual property tax bills may still go up, which is really hard to imagine, but there is a scenario here where, yes, you get a $300 credit, but if your assessed value went up because of trending or whatever the assessment is, you may still very well get a higher tax bill than what you got last year.
And that will probably be confusing for people because you can't make a blanket statement that everybody's going to see their taxes go down $300 in Fishers next year. That's not going to be the case. It'll depend whether their assessment went up. And if it went down, unlikely, I don't know anybody that went down, but if it, or stayed the same, if it stayed the same, you would see that benefit of that. But otherwise, it might be just offsetting whatever the increase in the assessed valuation. So that might be a confusion point. So there is lots of legislative change to lit, and in my opinion, not a bad thing. I don't like it because it puts the burden on the city to make this decision, but they at least gave you the tools to make up some of it. Make up some of the loss in the form of local option income tax. Schools do not have that authority. And matter of fact, some schools were getting lit in old Cadgett counties. They've even taken that away. So there is no, so schools are really feeling the pressure of the decline in assessed valuation and referendum rates, et cetera. That's a whole nother
Change
conversation.
the referendum process?
No, but with the assessed valuation declining with a fixed rate, the income for the referendums will be declining over between now and
But
2031.
they can still have another referendum.
Yeah, and you'll probably see schools out early before the renewal dates, trying to renew the referendum to plan for what that drop in assessed valuation is going to be. So Lisa, you're on page 33, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time. This is just a lot of numbers, but this is what's called the 6-year non-farm personal income factor. And for many years now, we've lived under this formula. And the idea behind it years ago was we don't want property tax in the state of Indiana going up faster than income tax. And so they link those two. Now, it is a statewide factor. That's something I never cared for, but it is a statewide factor. It doesn't matter if it's north, south, east, west, urban, suburban, rural. That's the factor. And so you average the 6 years. But when we got into these high increases in property values, they said, all right, that one's just kicking out too much money, because look here in 2021, this was the pandemic year when they started pushing a lot of federal money out. And so this 10% growth in income that year affected that change. And that was driving this up over 5%. And they didn't want you to get more money. They were trying to figure out how to limit you. So they essentially said, we're going to calculate that as it always is. We're going to apply 80%, but if it's over 4%, too bad we're doing 4%. So this is not at play. However, it is in play in future years. We go back to this formula right now, starting in next year's budget, but don't count on it because it's still averaging over 5%. And I don't think they're going to give everybody 5%. So anyway, I think that's going to be a change you're going to see. There are lots of conversations about making it more of a unique identifier, maybe at a county level. That would benefit Fishers if they did that, because we'd be living on the county's kind of overall growth, where we have been, because we haven't been growing quite enough. We got really close to these growth appeals that we'd call, but never quite over the edge. And that was killing us. I mean, we're growing this huge rate, yet we were always being pulled down to 4%.
So I think just to reset this for those of you that don't live in the weeds every day on this stuff, when he talks about this growth, this 4%, one of the common misunderstandings about local government in Indiana, because I can deal with this all the time, Fishers residents think that when you guys approve a budget that you have kind of unilateral authority to raise as much money as you want for the operations of the city. Like, you can just set the tax rate and you can collect whatever it is you deem necessary to provide services to the residents. That is not actually true. You guys are limited on the amount of property tax money you can collect off of our residents for general fund operations. And it can only grow by this allowance they give you. And that's what Mike's talking about, is that 4% is what basically they say, if you want to collect more money, John DeLucia, for the city of Fishers to provide general services, you can, but it can't exceed 4%.
Okay.
Yep. So no matter what, when people say, well, you guys go out there and you just borrow, or you just keep raising taxes to hire more firefighters or policemen or whatever, that's not actually accurate. You don't have the ability to do that above and beyond what that growth factor is.
And I'm not picking on Argus, Indiana, but I always use them as an example. If you're Argus, Indiana, and you're getting 4% increase in your levy, that probably is okay for inflation. 4% in Fishers, it only accounts for inflation. It doesn't account for the growth that's coming in. And so that has always put us at a disadvantage. And so I hope, so here's something they also did. Doesn't affect us because we didn't qualify, but there are units that qualify, Noblesville and Westfield at this point. If they're growing 2% faster than the statewide average growth, they qualify for what's called a growth appeal. And they eliminated that this session for all growing units. And there were only about 67 units in the whole state that were growing fast enough to qualify for that. And that's gone. However, by technicality, it's in place for one more year, because the DLGF has to certify the budget before December 31st, 25. The bill takes effect January 1, 26. But they're going to be really, really hard on them. I mean, they've come out with the appeal information, and I would say most of the people that are qualifying for the appeal actually aren't expecting to get it this year, because the appeal language is so strong.
So before you get to income tax money, I know Elliot hired policy analytics, you confirmed it. So we do know with all these property tax things that Mike just talked about from the legislature, we have a pretty firm understanding of what that means to all of us financially in terms of what we're lose. Is that fair, Mike?
Yes, yes. Lisa, if you go to the next page, page 34.
Do we hit that 4% maximum every year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we collect. Matter of fact, this is where our legislation, the city of Fishers that we worked on so hard over the fall, even before that, comes into play. Our maximum levy had fallen way behind everyone else, significantly behind everyone else, because we'd get this growth, but we couldn't get all the growth that we were getting. And I always say this problem goes back to the 70s. I mean, the early 70s, when they put maximum levies in place. If you existed, you were a unit, your levy's been compounding all those years. Fishers didn't even exist for the most part in 2000 or 1973. And so there were years where we started growing and we started qualifying for the appeal, and we appealed that every year we could. But then like 2014, the base got bigger and it was harder to grow it 2% faster than the state, and we stopped qualifying. And it was at that point where we really started losing ground then to everyone else. And so the request that we made said, give us a one-time adjustment. We set very specific criteria who would qualify. We were a unit that qualifies. And so we have a significant adjustment to our maximum levy this year, in that this number, this 30,716,000, is only unique to Fishers, okay? We were able to move our debt levies into this fund and make our maximum levy higher. Now, I'll tell you, it actually didn't affect the tax rate at all. You're going to see that it's actually going to go down a tick. But what this does is, for years, going back to the 70s, local option income tax has been distributed based on property tax. Back then, it probably made sense. Back then, they said, we're going to reduce property tax and we're going to replace with income tax. But now, 50 years later, all these problems are showing up, and there's these huge discrepancies in local option income tax. So from a revenue standpoint, this actually gets built into our general fund now. Our debt levies are going to go away. We're not going to have any debt levies. But now our base is bigger, and it will get calculated by the 4% going forward. So now we have a bigger number that we're applying the 4% to, which is a big advantage to us. And so now our maximum levy in comparison last year was 34 million, now $67.5 million. And so that was a huge change. And here's that 4% override that I told you about. They were using the 6-year non-farm personal income factor all these years, then bam, 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 they said 4%, no more. And so that's just one of the things they were trying to do to limit property tax. The assessed valuation, we do have a certified assessed valuation. That's on page 31, Lisa. And so, I'm sorry, Lisa, one last thing before I go to this. Go back one page, please. We have the annexation in play too, okay? And we won't get credit. One page back, there you go, Lisa, right there. So the annexation that took place, that will be effective January 1, 26, will affect our 27 revenue. And so this calculation right here will reflect that, in that when Vermilion and Flat Fork and the other areas that get pulled in, we will get about a 2.59% adjustment again on our maximum levy for that. And I don't know if you want to elaborate on why we waited to do that, but go to the assessed valuation page, Lisa, please. So on the assessed valuation, that's about $250 million. Okay. Had we annexed it when it was farm ground, that would have been just built into this base number all along, and it would still not have gotten us over the appeal calculation. So we would have never gotten an adjustment for it. But by waiting a little later till it gets developed, suddenly now that's a one-time adjustment. So we will get a true adjustment to the maximum levy for Vermilion and Flat Fork. So that's actually a pretty big. I mean, our tax base is so big But also, this is now a certified number, okay, for 2026. And it's 4.1%. So keep that 0.1% in mind here in a minute. But then look what we are discovering through the policy analytics study. When they do the parcel by parcel analysis and apply all these new deductions that I described, you start to see the assessed valuation go down. Well, if your levy's going up 4% and your AV is going down, tax rates go up. If your levy goes up 4% and the assessed valuation goes up 4%, tax rates are flat. So these work against each other. So we're going to see.
This is just so, I don't envy you guys trying to consume all of this today because it is so unbelievably complicated. Because what he just said would lead the average resident to go, well, my taxes are going up. Well, not necessarily because they're getting supplemental deductions in these years. That's why it's actually, so their assessed value is going down. Their tax rate might go up. So it literally you'd have to say, it depends. Tell me about your home. Tell me about your assessment. And then we could tell you it's literally gonna be down at that level to be able to answer anybody's questions about what does this mean for the taxpayer of Fishers.
Yeah, so
What page is that, Mike?
that is page 31.
The problem, Scott, is that the taxpayer won't, they don't see. School rates are gonna be so bad and they're gonna have to make up so much money that their overall tax bill is gonna go up. And all of us are gonna get blamed for it, just like everybody else.
Interesting enough, I've seen enough policy analytics studies now that's not necessarily the situation. Yeah, because their assessments are going down so much, you're going to be only paying on a third of your house.
Where the only group,
Yeah.
the only subcategory here that really at the end of this is kind of doesn't see any kind of adjustment but feels the impact of it is what I would call your traditional commercial real estate. Not apartments, not 2%ers, but the 3%ers. So if you're an office building in Fishers today, there's nothing in here that says you're getting any additional deduction whatsoever. Especially if you don't have a lot of business personal property, so you're not reducing there. You have a corporate headquarters here, right? The tax rate's gonna go up over the next 2 or 3 years fairly significantly, and there's no relief built in. So the only group here that I would say, I can assure you they're going to feel the pain of this is on the traditional commercial.
Good point, Scott.
Real estate.
For the last few years, if you looked at this on a pie chart, what has happened, that pie chart has become more residential based, paying the burden because values were going up 20% a year on homes. And so the burden was there. Commercial actually was paying less.
Yeah.
Because their assessments weren't going up. And so
That's a good point.
So
This whole thing is a reaction to a heated housing market where assessments have continued to outpace everything else. And that cost burden of providing services in your community has shifted away from commercial and then put on the individual homeowner. And so this is the legislature's attempt to redistribute that back more evenly across all the different categories.
So the commercial taxpayer will be paying more, but the personal property tax exemption.
So if you're if you're a manufacturing facility, you'll get relief from business personal property, but your real property tax will go up. So there might be a wash there. The guys that really get probably the least amount of relief, so to speak, and may see the most increase are the traditional office guys that they don't have a lot of business personal property and their tax rate's going to go up. They're the ones that I would think are probably most likely to feel it.
large manufacturers will still have to report. Anybody with 2 million or more, they're going to be large.
Yeah.
So, but the smaller ones, they'll get the business personal
They took the
property.
floor out too
On
so
new property.
over time,
Yeah.
even the big ones will see relief.
Scott mentions the floor. Right now, the system's set up, you can depreciate the equipment down to 30%. And then on any new property going forward now, there is no floor. It can be brought in and depreciated all the way down to zero. So that is also a difficult one to project because are the businesses going to run out and buy new personal property so they can depreciate it all the way down? I don't know. It's going to be wild to see that all play out. you know, if there's strategies to that.
Farmers found out that wasn't a great idea
Yeah,
10
Yeah.
years ago.
so, yeah.
Just
So tax rates, Lisa, if you go to tax rates, so I mentioned this earlier, so you see this huge adjustment to our maximum levy. But what the important part here is when you look at our debt rates, today we have 0.35 on a debt, we have 0.0015, and then we have, all of our debt rates will be gone. And we will now, what our commitment was to the legislators, we will not raise the tax rate. We will pull those debt levies or pull those debt payments into our general fund. We will not leave them outside. Typically, debt levies, when they go through the property tax back process, they're outside that maximum levy. They're outside the 4%. And so for years and years, we've had to rely on 1-year bonds because that's how we tried to make up on the capital side for what we were not getting on the operating side. We are not doing that. We won't be issuing short-term bonds because we had been doing that. Now, so you see our rate at 0.7065 this year. Next year, we will only have a general fund rate, which is a huge increase, right? We will have a penny on the health fund and we'll have our 5% CCD rate. And our rate is actually going down slightly because the assessed valuation grew 4.1% and the levy is only growing 4%.
I do want to take a minute to brag on this council in terms of in all the investments we made in the last 5 or 6 years in quality of life. In 2026, we're forecasting 0.7062, 70.62 cents. In 2020, we were 71.15. So, you know, we're 6 years later through all that inflation, through everything going on, and our tax rate is lower than it was 6 years ago.
Now, this is where the big shift's going to happen. In 26, people can still be talking about tax rates. We can still say we're managing our tax rate. In 27, I think the conversation shifts to levy. We're going to be telling the community we're asking for 4% more levy. We're not going to decide who pays that. That is a legislative decision who pays that 4%. We don't decide the payers. But you can see in the tax rates here now, because the assessed valuation's going down, even though our levy's going up 4%, it's going to cause those rates to go much higher.
This is where it pains Elliot and I, because we spent our careers taking a point of pride and really like having one of the lowest tax rates in the state and managing that. And then you can see in just 2 years going from 70.62 cents to 86.79 cents with nothing you've done. Like this has nothing to do with you spending more money or even getting more money. It has nothing to do with that. It's simply a function of how the state has decided to rethink how we collect revenue.
And limit property tax. Yeah, so the big shift coming in 27. 26, again, for the most part, the process, now we got a big shift because we got that new legislation for specifically that fits our scenario, which was huge. But for the most part in the state, 26 is not going to be a huge shift. Okay, let's go to page 47, Lisa. Now, local option income tax. If you think that conversation was complex, wait till I tell you this one.
you feel businessman.
Yeah. So Scott mentioned how complicated this has gotten. I will just tell you from my perspective, they took a fairly complicated system before and they doubled down on it. I mean, it is complex to try and understand how this is working. So Hamilton County has had.
47 tipping.
Yeah,
It's 3 less than what's in the.
yeah, it's 3 less than the PDF page.
Yeah, the PDF includes the
Yeah,
cover
yeah.
and the 2 contents page. So follow, if you got the hard copy,
Minus 3.
follow the hard copy
Yeah.
page. So this, starting off, this was a little disappointing. This was a piece of information. I'm not saying it was devastating, but just a little disappointing in that we just got this information within the last 2 weeks. They have certified how much income tax Hamilton County collected as a whole. That's the first step, right? Right now, we're not collecting it by municipality. We're going to be, but right now we're not. And that only came in at 2.7%. And so that would be okay if I saw similar things happening around us, but that's actually not what I saw. I go to Hancock County and their income tax is up 11.7%. In Johnson County, it's up 4.5%. In Marion County, it's up over 5%. Madison County is up 5%. I can't say this number is wrong, but I am going to follow up with the Department of Revenue to see if they could shed some light on how could Hamilton County only be up 2.7%. We've been down this road a few times over the years. And this is another one of those points that it doesn't make, logically, it doesn't make sense, right? You would see Hamilton County probably go up 2.7% just from the incomes going up, much less all the people moving into Hamilton County. So the problem with this affects all units, but that means there's just less to spread around to all of the units, right? So I don't think there's anything that I'm going to find out that's going to change this number in the immediate future. So this is what we got to work with in our budget process. This is what we're going to have to go forward with.
Was 22 accurate?
22,
Was that accurate in hindsight?
this one?
Yeah, the minus 3.6.
0.6.
Oh, so this gets into the weeds a little bit. That was the effect of the pandemic.
That delayed when you filed your income taxes.
So
Okay,
there's
all right.
some, there's like a period where
So you
it's
see
10
these
months,
weird things
12.
going on, high, lows.
Yeah.
And when the governor said, I'm gonna follow the federal stuff, we're gonna delay when people have to file, John went through this. They moved it out inside of our collection period.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, people, it allowed people longer to file their returns, right? So,
Well, let me ask it another way. So are the 10 double-digit increases over the last 4 or 5 years, in hindsight, those are accurate and now we're going to 2.7?
I can't answer it.
That's weird, yeah.
Yeah, and so it doesn't make sense logically, right?
Yeah.
And so, and especially when I look at the surrounding communities, like, I don't know, we do have a lot of large taxpayers as a county. Remember, this is a county-wide. And large taxpayers can swing things depending on when they file their returns. And did they move it just outside the window? This number reflects what was actually collected from July 1, 24 through June 30th, 25. If you think about Hamilton County, that was really still a good year. There was nothing weird that would say, oh, income was off in Hamilton County. I can't explain it. I'm hoping it's just a timing issue and that we'll see that bump up higher than others next year. But this is just what we have to work with. Now, I will tell you, this was also disappointing. That this is a certified year too. That's the last known year of collections is 2023. You think about it, we just filed our returns in April this year or 24. And so people file for extensions and it takes a while for them to figure out what they actually collected on the calendar year. But look, in 23, as a countywide, they're saying that's a certified number. It was only up 2.78%. Still a little puzzling there. But this one actually bothered me a little more than this one. I think this one will bump back up. But so right now, in the way the lit system works, and it's been this way for many, many years, is you calculate the amount you're going to get as a whole as a county, and then you distribute it based on this levy. One last thing before I leave this just our legislation that affects Fisher specifically. One of the other things that we did to soften the impact on the other units in the county is we were able to say to the state, we don't need a 15% reserve in our lit number. And that's been the balance. You have been required to maintain a 15% reserve at the state for that. And so our bigger piece, our levy going up so much that gets into the lit calculation was going to affect the other units in the counties. And so what we negotiated was, all right, it's going to affect you, but what we'll do is we'll drop the required balance in this fund, which pushes more money out through a special distribution to them to try and make them whole. of what they would have otherwise received prior to us getting this legislation. That is in place for 3 years right now. So that is how we helped get this over the finish line and get the language that helped Fishers so much through. So then the next thing, okay, before I leave this too, this is where special legislation, I've left it in here, but in 2028, this is the old model, but in 2028, that's when the new legislation is going to take effect on lit. And right now, as a county, we have a rate of 1.1%. 1% is called expenditure rate. That is collected and distributed to all the units within the county except schools. Schools do not get any piece of that. Then we have 0.1% for what's PSAP, which is your E911 operations. And so right now, as a whole, we have a 1.1% rate. The Thompson bill, that was pretty hard on property tax, put in new limits on income tax. And so the city now will be responsible to adopt their own lit rate for 2028. And so in somewhere between July 1, 27 and October 1, 27, you have to make that decision. And it will affect the 2028 amount you receive.
Now, there are a lot of communities that have apprehension about setting their own income tax rate. We should not be one of those. We should lean into this because for too many years, frankly, our income tax dollars raised here were going out the door to somewhere else. And so now we have the ability to set our rate and ensure that the money that residents and Fishers generate, the income they generate, if they have to pay for services, those services are actually being provided to them here in Fishers. So I don't shy away from the income tax rate conversation. Now, how we decide what rate to set it at, that'll become more clear as we move forward. We probably have more knowledge about kind of what we think our tax base is, but you need to start thinking about income, just like you think about property taxes, in that you have a tax base and you have a tax burden, and how are you going to spread it out over that, right? So for now in Fishers, you know, I personally think by the middle of next year, I'd feel confident starting to have the discussion about like, here's where I think generally we would land on an income tax rate. And I don't think you guys should be afraid of that conversation or apprehensive about it. I think it's actually a good thing for Fishers residents long-term.
On top of the county income tax rate?
Yeah, and I'll cover that in a minute here too, with the county's, but we'll be on top of the 1% that we have now. I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. But before we leave that, a problem that Fishers has always had too, we've been operating under what's called a lit council. And a lit council is made up of the cities and towns in the county based on population. Well, Fishers on their own could say, hey, I want to raise the rate or I want to lower the rate. And so it was spread, the responsibility was spread percentage wise based on that decision. The county had like 6% of the vote because they only have, you know, most of the population is in the municipalities now. So the county really didn't have any control of the rate. The municipalities control it. So it only takes Fishers and Carmel or Noblesville and Fishers or a different combination to always get a change in the rate. Well, that was a problem because we were out of control. You know, we were not getting our portion of lit. We didn't have any control over it. Sure, nobody else wanted to give up the money, right? Who would? But now, again, Scott pointed this out, you may not like the decision, but at least you have the tool in the toolbox to do it. You get to at least make that decision whether you want to collect it or not. Schools don't have that decision. They don't have a local option income tax to make up anything. And so at least you have that authority. And 1.2% is a lot, okay? The maximum lit rate here, Bill, going back to kind of your question, the maximum lit rate for any county now is 2.9%, including the city's rate. Hamilton County, keep in mind, is at 1.1% right now. The county's responsibility, they have up to the ability to adopt up to 1.2%. Then they have the ability to adopt up to another 0.4% for fire and EMS if they want to. And then they have another 0.2% for what are called non-municipal units, which is really the townships and the libraries. So the county now has to be politically responsible for the rate for the townships and for the townships. Excuse me, for town, they're actually responsible for towns less than 3,500 because they don't have the ability to raise a lit rate, and they're responsible for townships and libraries in the solid waste. So they'll have to adopt a rate high enough to make them whole. By the way, that formula changes completely too. It is going to be based on population, not the levy. And that caused the levy caused problems. I'm going to show you some of that here in a minute too.
So the distribution problem that was fixed by our unique legislation that we've been fighting for in court is not going to keep us from having to create our own local option.
It bridges the gap till we do this.
Yeah.
I think one thing that needs, the other is the current income tax is going away. Like, I don't want people to think that you're gonna continue to pay that income tax and then they gave us a tool to supplement. What happens is the old 1.1% that we've all paid for years, think of that as just going away. And instead now, each entity will adopt their own rate associated with it. So it's not.
Be on top.
It's not on top, no. It's not 1.1 and then we all get a tool that we can, it literally, the way that I think about it is that income tax stops in 28 or whatever. That's no longer there. And then basically what the state said is Fishers, you can adopt one. County, you can adopt one, and it can't exceed this amount of total. So what's gonna happen is Fishers has to look at, okay, how much money do we really need to collect? What's our tax base? And the county's gonna have to do the same thing. Where we're in a good position is we've been giving away so much money for so long that we have a really strong base, and the amount that we've been living off of has been relatively little. So our rate is in a good spot in comparison to a lot of other places who are gonna have to, they're gonna have to max out that rate. So what you're gonna have now is like right now, Fishers, we have a good property tax rate and it's lower than a lot of other municipalities. But our income tax rate is universal. Like if you go across Hamilton County, everybody pays the same income tax rate. What's gonna happen is you're going to have, Fishers may have a different property tax rate, but Fishers may also have a distinctly different income tax rate than Noblesville or Westfield or Carmel.
And this will be, go to page 44. It might be a little more visual here. This is how it's currently allocated. If you could scroll up a little bit, Lisa. 26 is what I'm trying to get to over here. So that 269 million that was on that page before, this is certified now, and I literally just got this on Monday. So that's why the plan's been dated so recent. So $269 million was collected in Hamilton County on the 1%, okay? The county is getting 27% of that 1%. The municipalities now, under this new model, they get 66%.
And one of the things they're gonna change in the state legislature, I guarantee you, is they walked out of the session and gave the county the ability to levy 200 and, well, more than that.
More than that, yeah.
Almost, so literally tomorrow, or under the current legislation, if the county wanted to, if they applied the rate that they're allowed to by the state under this new law, right now they're living off of $72 million. They could technically go get $300 million. There's no way. First of all, I don't think our county council will do that.
No.
Secondly, the state legislature they're gonna trim that significantly back.
I think, and I'm not speaking for the county council, I think where they'll go is they will probably adopt a rate high enough to replace what they've been getting. It will probably be between 27% to 28%. They were at 28% here in 25. That's what they've been getting. They dropped because of our special legislation. And so So I would envision the county will adopt a rate of that, so 0.27 instead of 1.2, they will be adopting a rate of 0.27 for that. They'll replace the PSAP rate of 0.1. And then they have to make the decision, do they want to adopt a higher rate to make up for the new property tax credit? Do they want to make that up? And then they're going to have to adopt a separate rate for the libraries. The libraries currently get 3.8% of the pie. And then and they can only go up to 0.5. But I can tell you, because it goes to population, Hamilton East actually is a big winner in that, and Carmel is not a winner because it's been based on levy before. And so when you look at the change in that makeup, it's a big swing. And
It's on
so
population.
based on
So
population.
this is a reason to get a special census.
Well, that's a conversation to be had.
Well, it doesn't take effect to 28.
Close
And
enough.
I mean, close enough, you have to make that decision, right? But then so they have to make up the townships too, right? They're at 2.9% and they can have up to 0.5. So when you think about the county rate, it's not even going to be close to 1.2 that their authority. Now, I will tell you, there are some communities that are over 2% now and the cap is 2.9. In Hamilton County, if you think about it, we have a strong tax base and we have strong incomes. If we can't make it through this, nobody's going to make it through it. And there are going to be communities that already have high income tax rates and are so far above the circuit breaker, they're going to hit the wall quick. They're going to be impacted much quicker. We're going to be able to get through this. So we have all this ability. I'm guessing somewhere at the end of the day, we'll probably still be pretty close to the 1.1% at the end of the day.
But I think what's different about that is I think we will actually be receiving more income tax than we've ever received before, even at that rate, because now the money's actually staying in the community.
Right. So that's the unique piece now, not my term, but has been dubbed kind of eat what you kill. You're going to set your own rate and whatever you collect, that's what you're going to get to spend. And so that is a different model than when we've been living under this old model for 50 years and nobody wanted to change it because there's winners and losers in it. And this new system is creating winners and losers among libraries, among townships. Finally, I get to say this. For 20 years, I've been saying this. Carmel Clay Library, or Carmel Clay Township, issued a bond back in 05. And there was a change in legislation that said no longer can debt be included, but they issued it right before it. And that park bond that they issued has been part of their lit calculation and their levy calculation for 20 some years. And if you look back, they were getting almost $4 million in shares. It finally dropped. They got 3 million last year and they got 1.6 million this year because their debt levy's going off. That debt levy's going off so that this is going to go down even further the next year.
I think at a high level, what I want to leave with you guys too is all of this also fundamentally changes. So when we make decisions at a city level to generate revenue that make life livable from a service perspective, you need to start thinking about the fact that income tax is becoming more prominent, like it's going to become a bigger part of our revenue piece. So how do you generate more income? It's not from where people work. It's from where people live. And so the more high income, high earners, high growth income wise and more dense environment you can create, the more revenue you're going to generate to make life livable and provide services. That's going to be an important thing as we move forward, is to think about, with all this legislation, what does it mean and how do we make Fisher sustainable financially? Because those plates are shifting in a significant way.
Couple other highlights. You can see the big impact of that levy change. Now, we didn't get the benefit. Another thing we negotiated, the lesson on the other communities, we didn't get the full benefit of that $30 million coming into our maximum levy. We said we will only use a portion of that in the calculation. But now you can see the highlight of it. Last year, we were 13.8% of the pie. We jumped to 15.6%, and it will go up again yet on that. So so our lit went from 36 million to 42 million. That helped us grab it.
Yeah, I just want to highlight, if that would not have occurred by next year, it would be likely that Noblesville
They would have.
would receive more income tax than Fishers, which by no metric makes any sense. And so we finally started to right the ship. We're still a long ways away from Carmel, and we shouldn't be exactly in parity with Carmel in all fairness. They do generate more income, but we are starting to right the ship.
That's right. And so when you look at, now Noblesville's still went up. So they were 35.9 million. They went to 37.4 because they're qualifying for that growth appeal. Their growth appeal has been pumping their levy up. And so they've been, now the growth appeal elimination hurts them, right? Now they're going to get hurt by that new legislation. So they still got a pretty decent bump. Westfield's still got a pretty decent bump because they qualify for the growth appeal. It's when we stop qualifying for the growth appeal where we just start losing ground. Our percentages are declining, actually. And so now in this case, Carmel's really did drop. Because their levy only goes up 4%. So they go from 64 million, or basically 65 million down to 64.3. But then you had these big shifts up here too. You had 3 million go to 1.5 million. Adams Township went away. And so when you look at Westfield, Noblesville, and Fishers, they actually received more money as a whole. So a lot of the 2.7% that came in and these other shifts is where it became a bigger portion for us.
So does this problem go away in 28 or it just?
Yeah, it does.
This whole thing can just, you throw it out the window.
Yeah.
And all you're looking at then is, like, Michael literally have a number, just like he did for the state total income. He'll just say, here's,
I will just have a number for Fishers.
well, it'll be just like property tax. We talk a lot about assessed value. You know, what's our assessed value? It's 9.6 billion. Would Michael walk in here and say, well, your total income earned in Fishers, I'm forecasting it to be 2.3 billion. Well, then you just literally, now you're just applying a rate to it and saying, and you could change that rate. Like, you could move that potentially.
So that's good and bad right now. That's a good point, Scott, I wanted to mention. There's going to be some tweaking of this next session. I'm positive of it. One thing Scott already pointed out, the cities are 66% of the lit. They get 1.2. The counties are not even 30%, and they're getting 1.2. That's probably going to get rebalanced. It's also a problem that they require everyone to adopt the lit rate annually. And that's not good from a bonding standpoint. The S&P might have some concerns with that. You issue bonds, you want those, if you do a revenue bond, if you're doing a lit pledge to that, they're going to want to know there's money there for the bonds and that the rate can't go away the next year by political reasons. And so there's got to be some kind of mechanism built in there to secure that piece of the rating for bonds.
So will our total revenue go from being property tax dominant, like you said, to income tax dominant?
They bring it, I think they come into parity.
Will come into parity.
More so than they have. I mean, before income tax was growing, but property tax was always kind of the predominant. But I think very quickly you'll see income tax, and it really will be a policy decision on your part about what rate you set. Because there could be a scenario where you are actually probably generating more income tax than property tax.
Yeah.
In the not too distant future. I mean, you look today, we're at,
Well, unless we had a recession.
well, but if you're at 42 million today in income tax, if you remember in property tax, I think our total is 66 million. So, and keep in mind, that'll probably, it's not gonna go up that much. You could see a scenario where this number, if incomes continue to grow and we set a rate slightly different, you get pretty close, but definitely closer to parity.
Yeah, so if your property tax keeps getting limited at 4%, but your income tax goes at 6%, that's eventually over time going to take over. The income tax will take over.
Now, one of the challenges we will have with this new system, just to be cognizant, is this is, unfortunately, if this would have happened in the early days, we would have really benefited. But today what happens is, okay, you're gonna kill what you eat. Before, everyone got to eat what everyone was killing across the county. So if you were Westfield or Carmel, or excuse me, Westfield or Noblesville for the last 25 years, you've gotten to benefit from the tremendous growth in Fishers and Carmel. That's not going to be the same scenario for us. So like when we set our own rate and now all of a sudden we're just eating what we kill, if Westfield's growing like crazy, we don't get to benefit from the growth of Westfield. So for us, the one thing we have to be careful about is we're towards the end of our population growth. We have to think about how we preserve enough income tax capacity for the future, because there's only so many people we can pack into Fishers. And I don't really know how you improve their incomes. You know, you might know more about that than I do, but there's only so much you can do about that. You can build more commercial real estate. I don't know how you have an influence on people's incomes.
I think we will be in good shape for many years. I think, again, so there are going to be other communities that hit the wall quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they don't have income basis for one. And two, they already have these high rates. They don't have a lot more to go. We will be in a position by the time we're done adopting that we're going to have a ton of capacity yet to raise the rate if that ever comes to it.
Right.
But it is going to be more of an eat what you kill approach. So it wouldn't, in the past, it hurt us when the Carmel issued the bond for the park, that hurt us. And you may not think that we were paying for that park, but we've been paying for that park for 20 years by the reallocation of that lit going to the park. So we don't use that pool, but we were paying for that pool, if that makes sense.
The kryptonite in this problem is the recession.
Recessions, good point, Bill. Recessions, now we're on a more of a volatile income. Property tax has always been very stable, very predictable for the most part. Now we're going to an income base, and that is more volatile, and your revenues are more tied to the ups and downs of the economy.
And I think that's one thing from a policy perspective that we'll have to think about is what our cash reserve policies are.
Yeah.
Because honestly,
Yeah.
we probably have the highest cash reserve policy around here that I've seen. Secondly, now that our debt is in our general fund levy, we need to think about what is the appropriate amount of cash to really keep on hand, because we're carrying more cash than we need today, to be honest with you. Like,
I think if we're gonna weather recession, probably better than anybody around us. Number of those, we've got a lot of cash. Plus, you're gonna see a lot of our debt start, the next
Yeah.
5 to 10 years start
starts to
falling
plummet,
off.
yeah.
But we may be able to a little bit more in the reserves in anticipation of a.
If you, when you guys look at the general fund here in a little bit, you'll see that we're well above what anybody
We're right
would.
at an hour.
Yeah, I don't know. People have time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so
I got one, I apologize.
I am going to wrap up pretty quick here now. I kind of wanted to set the big revenue
Good
things.
stuff.
The big revenue stuff, though, property tax and income tax, big changes in both of them. Setting the stage kind of what all that looks like. It's even more unique for you because of the special legislation. So Lisa, let's go to page 1, and I'm not going to go through all the pages. I just want to focus on the general fund because that's where all your meat is right now. Because everything, page 1.
And everything that Mike has been talking about for the past hour is right here on page 1.
Yeah.
Right? And that's consolidated way. So as you guys review this in the coming days, it's all right here on the first page.
Yeah, so everything that we've been discussing, all these changes, really come down to this page now. And so, interesting enough, this new property tax model actually starts to decrease our loss to the circuit breaker. And the reason being is, think about that $300,000 home. There are going to be fewer homes hitting circuit breaker as you decrease that assessed valuation on homes. And so people actually might be under the 1%. They might actually be under the 1% caps because of that. But this new line, okay, this is the new line in here, and that was a hit. Okay, so that's that new credit that was passed that really was the one that kind of pushed it over the edge to get Senate Bill 1 through. And so for us, it's just shy of $3 million. Now, the good news is that won't really grow much because everybody's going to be at the $300 cap. The only way it really grows then is if you have more people. If you have more houses, you're going to have a little more loss in that. But as Scott already pointed out, most of that has already happened. So this number actually will be pretty stable. I'm showing some growth there, but not much. So it becomes stable. So that's the reason I separated them, because they don't forecast the same. They don't circuit breaker loss and the new credit aren't the same. They're different forecasting strategies to them. So we actually gained a little bit back in this number. This whole page looks much different than last year, okay? Because now you can see our property tax in 2025 was $33 million and now it's $66 million. But now we have a new line in here where we're paying all of our debt payments out of. So that wasn't a real gain. Now I want to point out something else. This 20,813,000 is only part of your debt, because what we've designed the budget to do is the debt funds that existed, we are using the cash that was built up in them and depleting those. And so basically we had cash balances in those three debt funds. And by doing it this way, we chew up that cash and it leaves the cash in the general fund. So we really have more debt than $20 million. This is a real number going forward. Now, what also happens is we stop issuing this 1-year bond that we've been doing. And so the new line, because now we don't have a 1-year bond to issue capital, but what's been built in here now are a couple of new lines. A lot of that money, right, correct me if I'm wrong, was used on roads.
Correct. Yep.
And so now we have a new line in here that we call road and fleet capital. So that has to fit in our model now, because we're not issuing new debt for that. And then we've got a new line in here too, this $8 million for community. Oh, I got a misspelling there. I got two I's in there. Sorry about that.
Otherwise flawless, Mike.
Yeah, otherwise it's flawless. So anyway, that's a new line. And we also have this other line in here that's new. So if you want to do you guys want to jump in there and explain that we're trying to track those separately?
And then I'll just say, in closing, I know we're running out of time here. Next Wednesday, we're back in here and we'll cover down on the expenses in great detail, bringing our department heads and talk about everything in here. Just know that this budget 2026, the numbers in here currently are what we've been working on behind the scenes for the past 30, 45 days with our department heads to plug in here. We'll get into the details of that next week. But the last one I will share with you, just that other line seems odd of $1.9 million. That makes up two things. One, next year we have a 27th pay, just the way the counter works out. So that's like $1.6 million, $1.6 million for a 27th pay for our employees. We've got to account for that. The other 300,000 or so of that is for our health department. So the health department, we'll talk about that next week again, got hit pretty hard with some changes in the legislature. And so 300,000 of our general fund is going to pay for expenses from our health department. We'll get into where all the other sources come from for them to pay for their what they do, but 300,000 of that 1.9 is our health department.
And what this would say to you, this is the most important line. This is excess deficit revenues over expenditures, and this basically says our budget's in balance. And that is always the goal, is to balance the budget. Now, Lisa, if you scroll down just a little bit, that leaves us with almost $40 million of cash in the general fund beyond it. We're spending to our revenue, but it still leaves us the $40 million in cash that we're not touching. Now, Elliot's already kind of touched on this. I would tell you all your other larger miscellaneous revenues like food and beverage and wheel tax, those all look pretty good. Not anything shocking there. They're trending up just a little bit. So all those look, building permits look good.
Yep.
So all those look pretty good. I'm not going to go through EMS. Interest, over time will start to decline. Right now we're still holding, but if they start to lower interest rates, they're going, obviously our income will go down eventually for that. But nevertheless, this is growing because our portion of that lit grows because of this new legislation that was unique to us that we got through. So
is that really it? In 2 years, we're gonna be 9 million?
I guess you'll design a budget here that you'll probably increase your capital expenditures.
Yeah, so really quick, so 24 and back, real numbers, 25 is what we're executing on now. 26, these numbers are what we're going to propose you guys next week. So 27, 28, the expense side gets a little hazy, right? So we got to refine those as we go forward.
But I think the goal being, when you look at fixed costs, to managing your fixed costs going forward, you don't want those to get out of control, because that's how budgets start getting out of whack. And when you get your fixed costs out of whack with your revenue, then you got a problem. And so that's why capital lines are being built in here, because you can adjust these. You can decide to spend capital. And or maybe in the future, you do go back to issuing debt, to put some of that outside the freeze. I don't know, but not right now. That was our commitment to the legislators, that we would not do that in 26. And so that's why the rate's going down. So Elliot touched on the health fund. If there was that was a spot, we got hit, the state health grant. I don't think that's news to you. We got hit on that, so we had to make up for that. So that was probably the only other miscellaneous revenue that I would describe as wasn't so great. But I know that's a lot in an hour. I mean, I'm trying to cram, I'm trying to cram a lot of stuff.
Here's how you operate on a heart, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. But I'm not gonna get, you could go page by page, and if you have questions about the other funds, I'm happy to talk to you about that individually. But if you get the big picture, we did. A lot of places did not do great. We actually did pretty well this session. There's some pinch points that we got, but overall, I think we feel pretty good about it.
Absolutely, Mike. Absolutely. And thank you for coming in to walk through this.
Yes. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mike. Good job.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So Emily was nice enough to join us sorry, Emily, you got a lot of discussion today. But thanks for joining us. You guys have not met Emily, probably in person. Emily does our audit for Forvis. So we wrapped up the audit last month. She's just gonna kind of walk us through a lot of what that looks like. So happy to quick 10-minute.
I'm gonna slide down.
Yeah. So, Emily, I'll let you kind of take over and just kind of give a quick audit wrap up so we can check that as we kind of move through the 2026 budget process. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Morning, everyone. I apologize I couldn't be there in person. I had a prior commitment kind of out of the state, and I won't be back in town until later tonight. But I'll keep this short because I know you guys have had a long meeting talking about the budget, but just wanted to quickly go over the 2024 audit results. If you do have any questions as I'm going through this, please don't hesitate to interrupt me. A lot of this information is included in your required communication, which is one of the deliverables that we issue. So if you did want additional information or kind of more dialogue around any of those things, you could read that required communication as well. So I do want to highlight that you guys did issue all of your annual comprehensive financial report, or your ACFR. We also do the single audit report, which is your audit of your federal expenditures. And then lastly, we issue that required communication, and all of those have been issued, and we had clean or unmodified opinions on all of those deliverables. So it's really what the city should strive for and what you guys should see each year is those clean, unmodified results. This tab here this slide here really just talks about the responsibility for the audit, highlighting kind of what management's responsible for, as well as our responsibility, which is expressing an opinion over the financial statements. You will see that our audit is conducted in accordance with the standards that are listed out there at the bottom of this slide. Those are all consistent standards with how we've conducted our audit in the past, so nothing really new to point out there. This slide again just talks about our responsibilities in performing audit procedures and assessing risk to really focus on those high dollar or high risk value areas within the financial statements, because that's where we're going to spend kind of the bulk of our time or the bulk of our procedures during the audit process. As far as the scope of our audit, so our opinion does cover all of the statements that are listed at the top of this slide there. We do not provide an opinion on your management discussion analysis or required supplementary information, which are required parts of the annual comprehensive financial report. We do review that information, though, to make sure that there's nothing that contradicts anything else within the deliverables. Same for the introductory section and the statistical sections at the bottom that are prepared by the city. We do review those just to make sure that there's nothing that looks off, but those are not included in our audit opinion. On this slide here, I think is probably one of the more important ones in there. So it just summarizes high level the audit results. So as I mentioned, the opinions on the financial statements were all unmodified or clean opinions, which is what you want to see and what you should expect to see. When we look at government auditing standards, we did have one material weakness over internal control over financial reporting. I'll touch base on that here in just a second, but happy to report that there were no not material instances of non-compliance. And then if we look at uniform guidance findings, which again is your audit of your federal expenditures, we had no internal control findings and no non-compliance findings as well too. So very clean there, really only that one reportable finding of a material weakness. As far as significant accounting policies, those are going to be found in note 1 of the financial statements. I do want to mention that the city was required to adopt a new standard this year as GASB 101 related to compensated absences. The city and Baker Tilly went through an analysis to see if there was any change in your compensated absence balance. They went through that analysis and were able to determine that there was no impact with this new standard, and we went through and agreed with that as well. So ultimately, it didn't impact your guys' financial statements, but was some additional work by both the city and ourselves to make sure that we were all in agreement that you guys properly adopted that standard and there was no material change to your balance. Top here is just areas where you use judgments or accounting estimates, really all very consistent with where you've used those in the past. In the middle of this slide here, I always say if you only have 10 minutes to look at your annual comprehensive financial report, these would maybe be the footnotes I'd point your attention to, just given the overall size of those balances or the estimates incorporated in there. This slide is going to summarize our audit adjustments. So we did have one audit adjustment that was recorded in the financial statements. It related to increasing accounts payable and retainage payable in the Fishers Event Center, and specifically related to the construction invoices within that fund. That audit adjustment was fairly material for that fund, which is what resulted in that material weakness that we reported, or that reportable finding. So that material weakness really relates to that audit adjustment for increasing that accounts payable and retainage payable amount. So it was around, the combined of those two was around $13 million. So that accounts payable was added onto the books, as well as expense on the fund statements, and then recorded as a capital asset on the government wide. We did have a couple of proposed audit adjustments that were not recorded, or what we call past adjustments. You'll see those listed out there. The first two relate to unearned grant revenue. We did have that a past adjustment in the prior year, so we just had to report the turnaround impact as well as the current year past adjustment for that. And then lastly is a grants receivable. Each of those are fairly immaterial when you look at the overall city. And so we were in agreement with the city that there was no need to record those in the financial statements, but they are summarized in your management representation letter. They're included as an attachment on the back of that deliverable if you wanted to look at those. As I mentioned, you did have the one reportable finding or material weakness related to the audit adjustment, and it was again really just driven by the size of the adjustment. You guys have not had any reportable findings now for a number of years, so I don't see any issue or concern that this is going to be repeatable in the future. And the city and Baker Tilly are working to really kind of refine the accounts payable process and make sure something like this doesn't fall through the cracks. So I don't see any significant concern going forward that this would be something that would be repeatable in the future. We did have one deficiency related to payroll segregation of duties. This is one that's been in that deliverable for a while. A deficiency is not a reportable finding. That's the lowest level of internal control matter that we have, and just relates to individual and payroll having the ability to do a lot of the processes within that cycle. There are compensating controls in place, though, to keep this at a deficiency, and we don't believe there's any kind of concern. It's really just due to kind of staff restrictions and the cost benefit of hiring somebody else to mitigate that control. But you guys have mitigating controls in place, and that's why it's really stayed at that deficiency level. And then lastly, just that comment about verbally communicating deficiencies, those just relate to the past adjustments that I mentioned on the previous slide. Again, since those were not considered overall significant to the financial statements, we didn't feel like they warranted any type of written findings, so we're just verbally communicated and included in that past adjustment summary. At the bottom here, these are other matters, so things that we feel are important or upcoming standards. They're detailed more out in the required communication. Maybe the two things I'd mention here is that the Office of Management and Budget, which really governs your single audit or your audit of your federal expenditures, they did issue updated guidance. They've increased their threshold for what is required to have a single audit. So it has been $750,000 for as long as I can remember, so a very long time. They've finally updated that to $1 million. So that threshold has increased, and there's some other changes in there as well too. This could potentially have an impact on the city in the future if you guys end up having federal expenditures below that amount. I know there's been some years where they have been less than 750, but just want to highlight that that threshold is updating for the future. And then again, at the bottom here, there's just some GASB standards that are applicable. I just like to highlight here, there will be maybe some changes to the reports, maybe with GASB 101, but nothing really significant here. There shouldn't be really significant changes in any of the numbers. It's more of kind of disclosures or how the report is going to look or set up there. And then the last slide I have is just covering the single audit. So your audit of your federal expenditures, you were considered a low risk auditee. So we only had one major program that was tested in, and it was the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. You had total federal expenditures of just under 1.6 million, and that coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery was around $466,000. So it was around 30% of your total expenditures that were audited. And again, as I mentioned earlier, no compliance findings, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies over compliance. So very, very clean audit result there. So with that, that's all I had. I know I went through that super fast, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has or go into any more detail about any of the audit deliverables.
Questions for Emily?
Congratulations.
Yeah, how many years have we had a clean opinion?
I've been since we started going with them. Well, we've had them with State Board of Accounts, but with Forbes, I think we've been with you guys now 8 years. So almost, I've been here 10 years. So 10 years of clean opinions. So
That's something we made a decision to offer another level of financial guidelines and bringing in an outside firm rather than have the Board of Accounts audit you. And obviously, this was a more meaningful audit for our taxpayers as well as for you. So good job to you and your team.
Yeah.
Another great year. And certainly I saw that, segregation of duties.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably, it's probably every single audit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have that in. One thing, I wouldn't mind having a copy of the audit financial.
Yep, I'll send those out. Yep, I'll send that out to everybody. Yep. So we put it to State Board of Accounts. State Board of Accounts blesses it and then puts it out on their site too. But we have a version that we can send out to everybody. So
Probably the accounting geek that'll read it, but I will look at it.
So a lot of information contained in that report if everybody wants to read those hundreds of pages, but a lot of work to pull together. So
Yeah, I would say it is definitely a lot of work to put together. It's a large deliverable with a lot of stuff going in there that pulls from a lot. Lisa's team does a great job in pulling everything together, but it comes from a lot of different departments in the city to get everything kind of together. So it's a lot of work, and really should be proud kind of the results and that clean opinion that you guys are producing.
Thank you, Emily.
appreciate you joining us.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Emily.
Good welfare? See you next week.
We do a roll call.
Country runner doing pretty good. First meeting.